March 17, 1985. Autumn was beginning to paint its first strokes across the state capital of Porto Alegre. A mild temperature of 20 degrees Celsius marked the Sunday. On Coronel Genuino Street in the historic center district stood a two-story house built in the 1940s. It had recently been rented by Carlos Eduardo Martins, a bright 23-year-old who had just graduated with a degree in civil engineering from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. Carlos, as his friends called him, had moved into the property only 3 weeks prior. He was the only son of Antonio and Regina Martins, successful textile entrepreneurs from the city of Caxias do Sul, and he was the pride of his family. Determined to build an independent career in the capital, he had secured a job at a mid-sized construction company, planning to establish himself professionally before eventually returning to his hometown. That Sunday morning, Carlos had arranged to have lunch with friends from college at the Chalet da Praça 15, a traditional city landmark. According to later testimony, he left a message on the answering machine of his best friend Marcelo Viegas at 9:43 a.m., confirming their meeting for 1 o'clock. "I'll be there," the message said. "I need to tell you some news about the house. I discovered something strange in the bathroom last night. We'll talk in person." It was the last recorded communication from Carlos. By 1:30 p.m., 30 minutes after their scheduled meeting, his friends began to worry. Carlos was known for his punctuality, and his absence was unsettling. Calls to his home phone went unanswered. At 3 o'clock p.m., concerned, two of his friends, Marcelo Viegas and Luciana Campos, decided to go to his house to see if everything was all right. When they arrived, they found the front door unlocked, a detail entirely out of character for the meticulous Carlos. Inside, the house seemed unnervingly normal. The television was off. A half-empty cup of coffee sat on the kitchen table next to that Sunday's edition of the Zero Hora newspaper. Open to the classified section. In the bedroom, the bed was made, and his clothes were neatly arranged in the closet. In the second-floor bathroom, a damp towel suggested it had been used recently. There were no apparent signs of a struggle or violence. Carlos Eduardo Martins had simply vanished. Marcelo and Luciana immediately called the police. The incident was registered at the 2nd Police Precinct of Porto Alegre at 5:45 p.m. that same day. Detective Renato Oliveira took the case, ordering an immediate search and securing the residence for forensic analysis. In less than 24 hours, the disappearance of Carlos Eduardo was a major local news story, mobilizing dozens of officers. The mystery that began on that quiet March Sunday would not only scar the memory of the capital, but would also unfold into one of the most disturbing cases in Brazilian criminal history. A promising young man had disappeared without a trace in broad daylight in the heart of one of the country's major cities. The investigations that followed would uncover layers of secrets that had remained buried for decades. The first 72 hours after Carlos Eduardo's disappearance were marked by an unprecedented mobilization of the Porto Alegre authorities. The house on Coronel Genuino Street became the epicenter of an investigation that initially pursued traditional lines: kidnapping, a voluntary runaway, or an accident. Carlos's parents, Antonio and Regina Martins, arrived in Porto Alegre the morning after he vanished. Devastated, they offered a reward of 5 million cruzeiros for any information leading to their son's whereabouts. But in the days that followed, no ransom call ever came, weakening the kidnapping hypothesis. The first major break came from the property's owner, 67-year-old Sergio Mendes. In a statement given on March 20th, 3 days after the disappearance, Mendes revealed that the house had a peculiar history. "I bought the property in 1981 from a retired detective, Augusto Ferraz," he stated. He carried out several renovations on the property during the 1970s, mainly in the bathrooms and kitchen. I never lived there. I always kept it as a rental. This information led investigators to Augusto Ferraz, then 78 years old and living on a small farm in the metropolitan region. When questioned, the former detective was evasive. "I only made normal improvements, nothing structural," he claimed. "I sold that house because I needed money for medical treatment, nothing more." However, city records showed requests for structural modifications in 1974 and 1977, without specific details of the work performed. On March 25th, a week after Carlos vanished, the first key witness emerged. Dona Isolda Ferreira, 72, who had lived next door for over 3 decades, reported hearing a noise around 10:30 on the morning of the disappearance. "It was a strange sound, like a wall being broken, like hammering on concrete," she told the police. "Afterward, I heard water running for a long time. I thought the young man was doing some repairs in the bathroom." The search intensified. Hospitals, bus terminals, the airport, the banks of the Guaíba River. No location was left unchecked. Carlos's bank statement showed only routine transactions, with his last withdrawal made 2 days before he disappeared. His car, a white 1983 Volkswagen Gol, remained parked in the garage. His passport was found in his desk drawer, along with his personal documents. All evidence suggested that Carlos had not planned a trip or an escape. A false lead consumed precious weeks of the investigation. On April 11th, a gas station attendant on the coast claimed to have seen Carlos with another man, but after reviewing security footage, it was determined to be a case of mistaken identity. Detective Renato Oliveira faced mounting pressure. After 30 days with no concrete results, the case was transferred to the Homicide Division. This move signaled that the police were now working under the primary assumption that Carlos Eduardo had been the victim of a fatal crime. On May 2nd, 1985, the construction company where Carlos worked provided the police with an intriguing document. During his first month on the job, Carlos had requested access to the historical archives of architectural plans for downtown Porto Alegre, with a special interest in buildings from the 1940s. He mentioned being fascinated with old construction techniques, his supervisor stated, and wanted to study some peculiarities for a personal project. The investigation continued intensely for another 3 months but gradually lost momentum. With no body, no established crime scene, and no concrete suspects, the case of Carlos Eduardo Martins began to go cold. In October 1985, it was officially reclassified as a continued investigation, a bureaucratic euphemism for a case with no immediate resolution in sight. For the Martins family, however, the search never ceased. In 1986, Carlos's mother, Regina, founded one of the first organizations of its kind in Brazil, an association for families of the disappeared. His father, Antonio, never fully returned to work, dedicating much of his time and resources to the search for his son. The house on Coronel Genuino Street remained sealed by court order for 1 year. Afterward, it was returned to Sergio Mendes, who decided not to rent it out again. The property would stand empty for the next 13 years, silently guarding secrets that only time would reveal. January 1998. Porto Alegre was sweltering through one of the hottest summers in its history. The house on Coronel Genuino Street, vacant since the disappearance of Carlos Eduardo, was finally sold. The new owners were a young couple of architects, Paulo and Fernanda Guimarães, who planned to restore the historic property and turn it into their firm's office. Renovations began on February 10, 1998. The first phase of the project involved modernizing the plumbing and electrical systems. On February 17th, while partially demolishing a wall in the second-floor bathroom to expand the space, the workers made a macabre discovery. Behind a false brick wall, carefully constructed and covered with tiles identical to the originals, they found human remains. We were removing the tiles carefully to preserve them, the project engineer Roberto Menezes later told police. When we reached the brick layer, we noticed a different structure, like a double wall. When we removed the bricks, we found a cavity. That's when we saw the bones. The area was immediately sealed off, and the police were called. Detective Mauricio Torres of the Homicide Division took the case personally, recognizing its possible connection to the disappearance from 13 years earlier. The forensic team, led by medical examiner Dr. Claudio Sarmento, worked at the scene for 72 uninterrupted hours. The remains were carefully removed and taken to the Medical Legal Institute. A confirmation soon came via dental records compared against the medical files provided by the Martins family years before. The remains belonged to Carlos Eduardo Martins. The forensic analysis revealed disturbing details. Carlos had been walled in while he was still alive. Evidence of desperate escape attempts was found in the damage to his fingernails and fingers. The report concluded that the cause of death was asphyxiation, and his time of survival inside the wall likely did not exceed 24 hours. It is one of the cruelest cases I have investigated in my entire career, Dr. Sarmento stated at a press conference. The victim had been placed in a space approximately 60 centimeters wide, 1.8 meters high, and 40 centimeters deep. The wall had been erected quickly with fast-drying mortar and then tiled over to conceal the crime. The discovery reignited the cold case. Old testimonies were revisited and new lines of inquiry opened. The most significant revelation came from documents found in the archives of the construction company where Carlos had worked. In his personal notes, recovered after the case was reopened, Carlos had written an entry dated March 15, 1985, 2 days before he disappeared. The note suggested that he had discovered the false wall and was planning to investigate it on that fateful Sunday. This was the strange discovery he had intended to tell his friends about at the lunch that never happened. With the discovery of Carlos Eduardo Martins's remains, the investigation gained new momentum. Detective Mauricio Torres formed a dedicated task force, now treating the case as a qualified homicide. The focus immediately fell on Augusto Ferraz, the ex-detective who had owned the house and carried out the renovations in the 1970s. However, Ferraz had passed away in 1994 at the age of 87, never having been formally charged. In March 1998, investigators located Helena Ferraz, the ex-detective's daughter. In her testimony, she revealed surprising information. "My father kept newspaper clippings about the missing boy's case," she said. "He would get extremely agitated whenever the subject was mentioned. Once, when he was drunk, he said that some walls hold more secrets than they should." Armed with this, the police obtained a search warrant for Ferraz's old property. In the attic, locked inside a suitcase, they found a personal diary and documents related to a case that had never been officially reported. The diary entries written between 1973 and 1975 revealed that Augusto Ferraz had been unofficially investigating the disappearance of 3 young women in Porto Alegre. His notes suggested he suspected Renato Palhares, a respected doctor and a personal friend of influential politicians. One entry dated October 12, 1973 read, "Impossible to proceed officially. P has too many connections. Insufficient evidence for a formal case. I must act on my own." Attached to the diary were photographs of an excavation in the bathroom of the house on Coronel Genuino Street, Ferraz's own home at the time. One image clearly showed what appeared to be human remains being removed from a wall. The investigation took an even darker turn. Modern DNA tests performed on the fragmented bones found in deeper layers of the same cavity confirmed not only the presence of Carlos Eduardo, but also genetic material from at least 2 other individuals, presumed to be female. In July 1998, The police located Jorge Mendonça, a former investigator who had worked directly with Faraz in the 1970s. At 82 years old and in failing health, Mendonça finally revealed the truth in a recorded deposition. Faraz discovered that Dr. Palhares had murdered at least 3 women between 1971 and 1973. They were his patients who had disappeared. We gathered evidence, but we were shut down by political pressure. The chief of police ordered the case to be archived. Faraz became obsessed. He decided to deliver justice with his own hands. According to Mendonça, Faraz lured Palhares to his house under the pretense of discussing a health issue, and there he murdered him. He walled the body up in the second-floor bathroom, Mendonça confessed, where he knew no one would ever look. After that, he started renovating the house compulsively, always making structural changes. It is believed he transferred the remains of the other victims there as well, perhaps as a way to grant them a final resting place. The investigation concluded that Carlos Eduardo, using his knowledge of engineering, had discovered the false wall, inadvertently exposing a crime committed decades earlier. Someone who knew the house's hidden secret needed to silence him. Suspicion fell upon Jorge Campos, Faraz's former assistant who had remained in contact with the ex-commissioner until his death. Campos had worked as a caretaker for several properties in downtown Porto Alegre, including buildings near the house on Coronel Genuino Street. In September of 1998, police located Campos living under a false identity in Santa Maria in the interior of Rio Grande do Sul. When confronted with the evidence, he confessed. He called in a panic in March of 1985. He said the young engineer renting the old house had found something. I knew what it was. I went there that Sunday. I introduced myself as an employee from the water company, claiming there was a leak. When he showed me the bathroom, I saw he had already removed some of the tiles. I had no choice. Campos described how he struck Carlos in the head, knocking him unconscious. I widened the opening in the wall and placed him inside, still alive. Then I rebuilt it all, quickly. I used materials that were already in the basement, probably left over from Faraz's old renovations. He had taught me how. On November 12, 1998, Jorge Campos was sentenced to 30 years in prison for aggravated murder. Due to his advanced age, he served his sentence under house arrest until he died of natural causes in 2007. The complete exhumation of the wall revealed the remains of 5 people: Carlos Eduardo Martins, Renato Palhares, and 3 women later identified as patients who had disappeared from Palhares's clinic in the 1970s. The case was officially closed in January 1999. For the Martins family, the closure brought only partial relief. At least we know what happened. We can finally bury our son, stated Antonio Martins in a rare interview. Regina Martins continued her work with the Gaucha Association of Families of the Disappeared until her passing in 2010. Her legacy endures through the various public policies for missing persons she helped implement in Rio Grande do Sul. The house on Coronel Genuino Street was completely renovated and today is home to the Carlos Eduardo Martins Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping the families of missing persons and promoting improvements in police investigation protocols. The case of Carlos Eduardo Martins entered Brazilian criminal history as an example of how investigative persistence, even after decades, can reveal hidden truths and bring justice, however delayed. 25 years after the disappearance of Carlos Eduardo Martins, the impact of his case continues to reverberate through the judicial system and Brazilian society. What initially seemed to be just another unexplained disappearance became a landmark for investigative procedures in the country. In 2005, directly inspired by the Martins case, the state of Rio Grande do Sul passed Law 12.374, known as the Carlos Eduardo Law, which established rigorous protocols for investigating disappearances. The legislation mandates that missing persons cases be treated with the same priority as homicides from the very beginning, eliminating the waiting period that so often compromises crucial evidence. The discovery of the truth also shed light on a disturbing reality: the existence of unresolved historical crimes protected by structures of power. The political influence that shielded Palhares in the 1970s exemplifies how privileged positions can obstruct justice, leading to cycles of violence and extra-legal retribution. Marcelo Viegas, the friend who first noticed Carlos's disappearance, became a public prosecutor specializing in missing persons cases. In a 2010 interview, he reflected, "Carlos's case showed me that the truth can be literally right in front of us, hidden by layers that need to be carefully removed." Every disappearance carries complex stories that deserve our full attention. In 2008, the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul inaugurated the Carlos Eduardo Martins Laboratory for Forensic Engineering Analysis, dedicated to developing techniques that apply engineering knowledge to criminal investigations. The lab has become a national reference, training specialists who now work throughout Brazil. Luciana Campos, the friend who accompanied Marcelo on that fateful Sunday in 1985, pursued a career in journalism and in 2015 produced the internationally acclaimed documentary Walls of Silence. In the film, she not only reconstructs the case but also investigates 27 other disappearances in Porto Alegre between 1970 and 1990, revealing disturbing patterns and previously ignored connections. For the civil engineering community, Carlos Eduardo became a symbol of the importance of professional ethics and social responsibility. Annually, the Regional Council of Engineering and Agronomy of Rio Grande do Sul, CREORS, awards the Carlos Eduardo Martins Prize to projects that contribute to public safety through engineering. The house on Coronel Genuino Street, now the headquarters of the institute bearing Carlos's name, receives thousands of visitors each year, including students, public safety professionals, and families of the disappeared. The second-floor bathroom has been preserved as a memorial, with a transparent plaque allowing a view into the cavity where the bodies were found, a grim but necessary reminder of the importance of seeking the truth. In 2020, the Carlos Eduardo Martins Institute expanded its work, creating the first DNA bank for relatives of missing persons in southern Brazil. This technology has already enabled the identification of 47 individuals, previously buried as unknown. Perhaps the case's most profound legacy is its impact on the collective consciousness regarding disappearances. Once treated as isolated and often neglected events, they are now seen as complex social phenomena requiring a multidisciplinary approach. Regina Martins's phrase, "A disappearance never affects just one person but an entire community," has become a motto for dedicated organizations across the country. The case also highlighted how buildings can literally conceal crimes. After 1998, the Brazilian Federal Police developed specific techniques for analyzing structural alterations in old buildings, using everything from historical documents to technologies like ground-penetrating radar, GPR, to identify anomalies in walls and floors. For the community of Porto Alegre, the case's resolution brought a mixture of relief and unease. The idea that bodies had remained hidden for decades in a seemingly normal house in the city center shattered many people's sense of security. Simultaneously, it proved that even the best-kept secrets can eventually come to light. If you've watched this far, it's because you care about these cases that scar families forever. Let me know you're here by leaving a comment that says, "I watched until the end." It helps me know who truly cares about the search for truth. This case reminds us that behind every missing person statistic, there is a complex story, devastated families, and often painful truths waiting to be revealed. If this story touched you in any way, please leave a like. Share it with others who value these real stories and subscribe to the channel to follow more investigations that uncover the hidden layers of our society. The story of Carlos Eduardo Martins teaches us, above all, that the search for truth, no matter how long it takes, is a moral imperative that honors not only the victims but the very humanity we all share.